Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee LaValle McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about seasons, cycles, and the need for healthy structure. Whether we feel it or not, we are part of the natural world, children of the earth. And for millennia before the modern era where we live in boxes and drive around in boxes that takes us to other boxes, where we look at the weather through windows and may even have to travel some distance to put our feet on the bare earth, we are more connected with the natural cycles and rhythms of the earth than we might be aware. And they have a lot to teach us about how to navigate the many areas of our life with wisdom, depth, and grace. Unless you work the graveyard shift, it's likely that your sleep-wake cycle has something to do with the cycle of the sun. Many women's menstrual cycle averages around 28 days, which is the rhythm of the moon. For much of human existence, the natural world and the elements in it were experienced as living entities. That the actions of the oceans, the wind, the trees, and the creatures of the earth were experienced as relationships and respected for the unique wisdom and life force that each of those carried. With the rise of science and the Enlightenment in the 15th and 16th centuries, rationalism under philosophers like René Descartes, many came to see the world as a commodity to be controlled or manipulated by people rather than a community of which we're a part. We began to see the natural world as if it were inanimate, lifeless. Nature became something to serve us or that we could control rather than something we participate in. And as we've separated ourselves more and more from the spirit of nature, we've lost connection with much of our own spiritual wisdom ourselves. But it's easy to return to because nature and the life force which runs through it is ever present. I had the advantage of growing up in New England where we had 4 very distinct seasons, and the weather remains one thing that humans have very little control over. Certainly with the advent of global warming, it looks like we have an impact on the weather, but as the industrial age moves into the information age, we may be reaching the outer limits of how much we can manipulate the natural world to our benefit without dire consequences. And one of the unique things about being a human is that we have the ability to be aware of ourself and to self-correct. Now, other creatures may be able to do that, but it's certain that humans can. I was just entering first grade when Apollo 11 landed the first human on the moon. And I've kind of seen the end of the era where people believed science would figure it out. And I think the way forward is to reincorporate some of the ancient wisdom with our modern knowledge and capacity. And for myself, understanding that there are seasons in life, both kind of natural, smaller cycles, annual cycles, and even cycles over a whole lifetime, that's brought great relief to me. Applying the idea of spring, summer, fall, and winter into my own life, and the necessity of each of those seasons, that each prepares and contributes for the season to follow, has been really helpful, professionally, socially, even physically for me. Western culture tends to want to be in perpetual spring and summer, always growing and producing. We don't have a cultural practice of harvest, burning the fields, the resting time of winter. There's a term in farming of letting the fields go fallow, which means letting them rest for a season. Because if you plant in a field year after year, season after season, it will deplete the nutrients from the earth and then it won't produce as well. So they plant replenishing crops that will bring nitrogen and other nutrients back into the earth on the off season, or sometimes they just let it rest altogether. And that can be really instructive in my own life. There are many plants that need the cold in order to bloom, like tulips, for instance. You plant tulips in the fall, And after the cold winter, they come up in the spring. You can trick them. I live in Northern California where we don't get a cold winter, and you can buy tulip bulbs and put them in the refrigerator for 4 to 6 weeks. But if you don't make them cold, they won't bloom well. But we can tend to get very anxious when things aren't producing or growing. There's natural economic cycles of growth, and we call it depression. And it's interesting because a lot of my own struggle with depression was really relieved when I understood that I had a need for periods of rest, particularly in the winter when it started to get dark. And when I just allowed myself to sleep more, to not go out as much, to be in my own physical fall and winter, what I had experienced as depression, which had a lot to do with my mental state of shaming and blaming myself for wanting to slow down, when I let that go and allowed myself to participate in my own season of winter, it was a time of introspection, of quiet, and of much needed rest. And although I absolutely believe we live in an interactive universe, my part of the interaction is knowing how to appropriately use my will and how to pay attention to the larger feedback and how to also pay attention and honor the cycles emotionally, physically, and energetically within myself. And they're unique to each person. A lot of people are really sleep obsessed. And because I've worked for myself most of my adult life, I have a lot of flexibility in how I schedule my day. I tend to be a short sleeper, and I like to get up early. I generally sleep 5 or 6 hours at night, but I nap almost every day, somewhere between 10 minutes and an hour. And if I'm extra tired, I might even nap twice. And although there's all kinds of information and articles telling me I need a certain number of hours of sleep, it's not my experience. Sometimes I'll sleep 8, but I just don't seem to need that much. I went into menopause in my mid-40s, and it really changed my metabolism, and my weight started to creep up slowly. And it's taken me a while to find a rhythm of eating that allows me to maintain a steady weight. I had a pretty intense eating disorder, and having continuity in my body size is really important for my stability and mental health. I just end up spending way too much time thinking about my body if I'm gaining and losing weight. And I started to experiment with fasting in the last few years, intermittent fasting. I found a 16-8 ratio where I eat during an 8-hour window and I don't eat for the other 16 hours works best for me. And a couple of days a week, I only eat one meal. I tend to like to look at things on a weekly basis rather than on a daily basis. So if I get 8 hours sleep twice a week, if I work out 2 or 3 times a week, and if I eat only one meal a day, a couple times a week, that seems to work really well for me physically. Now, mental and emotional rhythms and cycles and seasons can be a little more elusive, but there have been many times in my life where no matter how hard I try, things just don't seem to be getting traction, professionally or socially or even relationally. And rather than fighting against it and pushing even harder, I've learned to turn toward it. Maybe the field needs to be fallow for a little while. Maybe I need a little bit of winter. This therapist told a great story of his own bout with depression as a really positive force in his life. He was the son of a judge who was the son of a judge, and it was expected that he would go to law school and become a judge. And he was sent to fancy prep schools and went to get his undergraduate degree in law because that was what was expected. And he hated it. And at the end of his freshman year, he went into a deep depression. He ended up in an institution for a couple months. And as he looked back on that period where he really wasn't able to do anything, he felt like he was recharging his batteries, that there was deep preparation happening unconsciously under the earth, like the tulips in the cold winter. And when he came out of the nut house, he was able to tell his father, I don't want to be a lawyer. I don't want to be a judge. I want to be a psychiatrist. It took tremendous courage for him to disappoint his father. And he gathered that courage and his clarity around his own truth during that period of darkness. Sometimes darkness makes things clear or reveals things we can't see when we're busy running around in the light. And if we keep the lights on all the time, we don't get the information that the darkness wants to offer us. And he went on to have a really successful career. As I've grown and changed over time, over and over again, there's been a falling away of different social circles. I absolutely have some continuous and valuable friendships, but there have been many times when kind of old sets of friends have fallen away, often followed by a period of kind of social emptiness, which is then followed by a new spring. That may have happened more for me than most people, starting as a street corner drug addict, working my way through learning how to be a functional member of society, and now hopefully in a place where I have something to give back. It's been a pretty intense evolution, and the people I hung out with 35 years ago are not people I would want to hang out with today. And if I don't understand that there's a seasonal nature that I can trust, letting go of what no longer serves us can be frightening. We tend to think of things in a linear way, as a line that has a beginning and an end, rather than as a perpetual cycle, circle, or spiral, which is actually more accurate. And there's a lot of comfort in that, because if you wait, it will come around. And I think that's true with money and business, with family and relationships, and again with my own body. And of course, there's a larger cycle within a human life, the spring being our youth, summer, young adulthood, autumn, mature adulthood, time of producing and harvest, and the old age of winter. Each has its own beauty, its own wisdom, its own gifts and instruction. And when we learn from these seasons, allow them to change us, subject ourselves to them, rather than fighting against it, there's a depth and an ease to our existence, again, that we can trust. And one of my favorite passages from the King James Bible, Ecclesiastes 3. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, and a time to die, a time to plant, and a time to pluck up that which is planted, a time to weep, and a time to laugh, a time to mourn, and a time to dance, a time to get, and a time to lose, a time to keep, and a time to cast away. It's longer than that, but you get the idea. And I encourage you to consider what season you are in the different areas of your life right now, and can you allow it and learn from it and let it inform and instruct you. Thank you so much for listening. If you'd like to find out how spiritual psychology might benefit you in your life, send me an email, info@reneemckenna.com. Check us out on Instagram @OpenDoorGrowth. And if you'd like to download the first chapter of my book, workbook, and audio series, Allies and Demons, Working with Spirit for Power and Healing, there's a link in the show notes. Thanks to my supporters on Patreon, and blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.